Some people are born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Some are born with a fighting spirit that allows them to claw their way to the top. And then there was John Osbourne, born in post-war Aston, Birmingham, seemingly gifted with a supernatural, almost genius-level talent for tripping over his own feet and landing face-first in a pile of shit. Let's be clear. Aston in the 1950s wasn't a launchpad for dreamers. It was a grid of substandard terraced houses huddled under a permanent grey sky, a place where the height of a boy's ambition was supposed to be a steady job at the GEC or the Lucas factory. The deal was simple: you traded your youth, your hearing, and the feeling in your fingers for a life sentence of noise and metal filings, and if you were lucky, you got a bad back and a cheap watch before you died. It was a low bar to clear. But even this grim, pre-packaged destiny was beyond the reach of young Ozzy. The simple truth is that John Osbourne was a glitch in the system. He was a square peg in a world made of round holes, a faulty appliance in an era that had no time for anything that didn't work as intended. It wasn't just that he was naughty or rebellious in the typical working-class lad sort of way. He seemed to be fundamentally allergic to the concepts of common sense, forward planning, and not doing the most spectacularly stupid thing possible in any given situation. He was a walking, talking, one-man argument against the idea of intelligent design. Before he was the Prince of Darkness, before the bats and the millions and the legend, he was the undisputed, undefeated, heavyweight champion of the fuck-up. His early life isn't a simple story of humble beginnings, it's a case study, a symphony of failure played in a minor key. And the evidence is overwhelming. Let us present Exhibit A, the employment history of John Osbourne, a document so short and disastrous it makes a plane's black box recorder look like a light-hearted comedy. His first foray into the world of honest work was as a plumber's apprentice. It was a trade. A real, respectable job. For a few freezing, miserable days, he crawled around under houses and fiddled with pipes, his hands numb and his soul chilled to the bone. This noble career, however, came to an abrupt end when he was sacked for indulging in his oldest and dearest pastime, scrumping apples from a client's garden. He couldn't help himself. The respectable tradesman was defeated by the impulses of a naughty 10-year-old. Next, a job at an industrial plant, overseeing a bubbling cauldron of industrial nastiness called a degreasing machine. The vat came with a large, explicit warning sign detailing the toxic, hazardous nature of the chemicals within and the absolute necessity of wearing a protective mask at all times. To most people, this is a deterrent. To Ozzy, it was a product description. A quick, curious sniff one morning confirmed that the fumes provided a magnificent, head-spinning buzz. Soon, he was a full-blown fume addict, taking tea breaks to get a greaser-faced huff from the tank. He spent his days wobbling around the factory floor like a drunk scarecrow until, inevitably, he was found passed out, slumped over the machine. He was fired before his head had even stopped buzzing. Finally, in a last-ditch attempt to save him from himself, his mother secured him a real opportunity, an apprenticeship at the Lucas factory. His prestigious new title, car horn tuner. The job was a vision from a specific, auditory corner of hell. He sat in a small, soundproofed booth for 9 hours a day, listening to an endless parade of horns burp and beep and boop. It was here that he met Harry, a cheerful old bloke who had been doing the same job for 29 years and 7 months. And in 5 months' time, Harry beamed, his face glowing with the pride of a man who has successfully endured 3 decades of auditory waterboarding. "I'll get me gold watch." In that moment, Ozzy saw his future. He saw himself, 30 years down the line, deaf as a post, his greatest achievement in life being a cheap piece of gold-plated tin given to him for not dying sooner. He looked at the horn in his hand, looked at Harry's blissful, institutionalized face, and realized this wasn't a job, it was a tomb. He threw down his screwdriver, walked out of the booth, and never looked back. So, The tally stood thus: 1 trade, failed due to petty theft; 1 hazardous job, failed due to self-poisoning; and 1 safe apprenticeship, failed due to an acute, soul-crushing existential crisis. The verdict was in. John Osbourne was officially, certifiably, and catastrophically unemployable. So, what's a lad to do when he's proven too lazy for a trade, too stupid for a factory, and too sane for a lifetime of tuning car horns? He turns to crime, of course. It's the final refuge for the creatively unemployable. If you can't earn a living, you may as well try to steal one. Let us present Exhibit B, the short, tragic, and utterly hilarious criminal career of John Osbourne. His grand enterprise was to be a burglar. His high-stakes target was a local clothes shop, Sarah Clark's. On his first attempt, feeling like a shadow in the night, he slipped in, fumbled around in the pitch dark, and made off with what he thought was a bag full of valuable gear. He got it home, heart pounding with adrenaline, only to discover he'd risked his liberty for a sad little pile of baby bits and toddler's underwear. His career as a master thief had begun with him equipped to dress a particularly well-off infant. Undeterred by this sartorial failure, a clear sign from the universe that he should just pack it in, he went back for a second go. This time, he aimed higher. He aimed for a television. After wrestling the monstrously heavy box out of the shop, he faced his greatest challenge, a brick wall in the back alley. As he heaved the TV upwards, physics, a subject he'd ignored in school, decided to teach him a brutal lesson. The television tipped, fell, and pinned him to the ground in a ditch full of nettles. For one long, painful hour, the great train robber of Aston lay trapped beneath his prize, stewing in shame and the stinging embrace of 1,000 nettles. He was a monument to bad ideas. On his third go, he decided it was time to get serious. He was going to be a true professional. He got in, he grabbed some actual, sellable shirts, and he even remembered to wear gloves to cover his tracks. The problem, tiny detail that would have been caught by any criminal with an IQ higher than a turnip, was that one of the gloves was missing its thumb. As he moved through the shop, feeling like a proper villain, he was diligently leaving a perfect, greasy map of his thumbprint on every surface he touched. A few days later, a polite knock on the door revealed 2 policemen who looked more tired than intimidating. The case didn't require much detective work. They found the swag, they found the gloves, and one of the coppers held up the thumbless one with a look of profound pity. "A thumbless glove, eh?" he said, shaking his head slowly. "Not exactly Einstein, are we, son?" The case was closed. Exhibit B rested. John Osbourne had officially failed at being a bad guy just as spectacularly as he'd failed at being a good one. So, if John Osbourne was too inept to be a worker and too witless to be a criminal, where in God's name was a lad like that supposed to fit in? What possible job could exist that required a high tolerance for chaos, a questionable moral compass, and a complete lack of common sense? The answer, it turned out, was an abattoir. The slaughterhouse in Digbeth was a place of blood, guts, and black humor, a vision of hell that would turn the average person into a lifelong vegetarian. For Ozzy, it felt like coming home. He started at the very bottom, with the glamorous title of puke remover, a job that involved exactly what it sounds like. He spent weeks vomiting his own guts out, but he stuck with it. He was promoted to cow killer, a job he took to with natural, terrifying talent. This wasn't just a job, it was a culture. The men he worked with were just as fucking crazy as he was. They were hard-drinking, foul-mouthed pranksters, and Ozzy was in his element. His favorite party trick was to sneak a handful of cow's eyeballs out of the slaughterhouse at the end of a shift. Later at the pub, he'd wait for a sensitive-looking girl to leave her drink unattended and gently drop a fresh, gelatinous eyeball into her can of Coke. The resulting scream was, to him, the sound of pure comedy. He had found his tribe. He had found his calling. He was happy. And then, true to form, he fucked it all up. The guys had a running joke where they'd sneak up behind you and cut the strings on your butcher's apron, making it fall off. One day, a particular bloke did it one too many times. Something inside Ozzy, that same wire that had tripped when his teacher humiliated him, snapped. He didn't just get angry, he went berserk. He grabbed a heavy, solid pole used for rendering fat and whacked the guy over the head with it. There was blood everywhere. His co-worker was carted off to the hospital. The boss didn't even waste time with a formal dismissal. He just pointed a bloody finger towards the gate. Fuck off and don't come back. He had finally found the one place on earth that was as mad as he was, and he had still managed to get himself thrown out for being too violent. The evidence was now complete. There was no job, legal or illegal, that could contain him. There was simply no place for him in the ordinary world. So there you have it. The complete portfolio of a professional fuck-up. Unemployable as a worker, incompetent as a criminal, and too volatile even for the blood-soaked chaos of a slaughterhouse. He was a man with no place to go and no skills to get there. What, in the name of all that is holy, was the world supposed to do with a creature like John Osbourne? Only one man seemed to have the measure of it all. His father, Jack. From his worn-out armchair at 14 Lodge Road, Jack Osbourne had watched this whole shambolic drama unfold. He'd seen the failed jobs, heard the stories of comical incompetence, and watched his son vibrate with an energy that simply didn't fit within the sustained lines of Aston. He wasn't a fortune teller, and he didn't need to be. After witnessing his son's uncanny ability to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory time and time again, Jack came to a simple, yet profound, conclusion about the boy's destiny. It was a conclusion he'd often share after a few beers had washed away the grime of the factory floor, his voice a low rumble of certainty. He'd look at his wired, anxious, walking disaster of a son and lay it all out. "I've got a feeling about you, John Osbourne," he'd say. "You're either going to do something very special, or you're going to go to prison." And in that moment, he wasn't just being a pessimistic father, he was being a brilliant analyst. He saw that the chaotic, fizzing energy inside his son couldn't be grounded, tamed, or molded into the shape of a normal life. It was too powerful, too volatile. It had to explode. It would either propel him to unimaginable heights of fame and fortune, or it would consume him entirely and land him in a 6-by-8-foot cell. There was no quiet, suburban middle ground for a boy like Ozzy. It was the perfect summary of all the evidence we've just seen. 2 parts. The grand stage or the steel-barred cage. The only question was which one would claim him first. As it turned out, the world didn't have to wait long for an answer. The grand stage would have to hold its booking. The steel-barred cage put in its bid first. The chickens of his comically inept burglary career, led by a thumbless glove, came home to roost. The arrest was swift, the court appearance a blur. The machinery of justice, when dealing with open and shut cases of pure stupidity, is brutally efficient. The verdict was a 40 quid fine, a sum so far beyond Ozzy's reality it might as well have been a castle. There was only one person he could turn to, and in a final, desperate plea, he begged his father to pay the fine. Jack listened to his son's panicked rambling, his face impassive. This wasn't a surprise to him. It was the inevitable result he had foreseen all along. It wasn't just a father being stingy when he refused, it was the prophet refusing to interfere with the prophecy. Jack, having already made his diagnosis of his son's condition, was now administering the harsh medicine. "You need to be taught a fucking lesson," he said, and the words were not an attack, but a sentence. The discussion was over. With the fine unpaid, Ozzy was brought back before the judge. The gears of the system turned, and the final verdict was delivered. 3 months in Winson Green prison. The name alone was enough to turn his blood to ice. Winson Green was a name that parents used to scare naughty children, a local monument to misery and violence. In that sterile courtroom, the world stopped. The grand symphony of failure that had been his life until that point, the botched jobs, the bungled crimes, the endless string of fuck-ups, had reached its crashing, discordant finale. He was no longer John Osbourne, the unemployable clown from Aston. He was a number. He was property of the state, a terrified 17-year-old about to be swallowed whole by the most notorious prison in the Midlands. The bill for his chaotic childhood had finally come due.